Welcome to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. The UK's Business Secretary, Vince Cable, has compared the Bank of England to the Taliban and to jihadists. Vince made this comparison not because of their reckless quantitative easing, nor because of their overlooking bank fraud and infinite rehypothecation, that is to say, because they are indeed terrorists. No. Vince Cable is saying that the Bank of England are jihadis for insisting banks have minimum capital reserves. Vince, oh boy! As I've said for years, the Bank of England are indeed like the Taliban, but only because they provided the safe haven for the jihadis of banking fraud who strapped on the debt-packed suicide vest and blew up the entire frickin' economy. And that same Taliban central bank is now papering over the bloody aftermath with little pieces of digital paper. Now to explain more, we turn to Stacey Herbert.
Well, Max, first of all, I did look up jihad, and I'm sure the NSA knows I looked it up on Google. And the definition provided by Google was that it's a war or struggle against unbelievers. So this is important for the rest of this episode, this notion of unbelievers, which I think we should reterm for the West as disbelievers. Nobody believes their lies and fraud anymore. Vince Cable calls Bank of England capital Taliban. Vince Cable has stirred tensions within the Bank of England by apparently comparing policymakers to the Taliban over restrictions imposed upon banks.
Well, first of all, let me say something, which is that I coined the term financial terrorist. Now, here comes Vince Cable glomming onto my poetic characterization of the Bank of England and all the banks in the UK as financial terrorists by creating this term of capital jihadists. But of course, he's misapplying that term. The banks, of course, they would need capital reserve requirements to be functioning banks in a free market system. You don't want banks involved in Ponzi scheme economics like Vince Cable is proposing, like Vince Cable is perpetrating, like Vince Cable is supporting by saying, no, we don't want minimum capital requirements for banks. We want financial terrorism. So Vince Cable now has become financial terrorist number one. It used to be George Osborne, but now Vince Cable. You're financial terrorist number one. You've earned that right for stealing my material without attribution. That right there is a copyright violation, schmuck.
Well, he's comparing them to the Taliban, capital Taliban. So basically, here's the Bank of England, and you could look back for 300 years of their interest rate policy. Their money, their capital policies are looser than they ever been. This is the equivalent of a woman walking down the street with a G-string and pasties on, and he's saying that that the Bank of England is treating the money as if it has a full-clad burqa on and hiding the money, keeping the money from flowing loosely around the economy. He's blaming them for these capital requirements, despite having ultra loose monetary policy.
Right, well, that brings up the question, would you rather see Vince Cable wearing pasties on his nipples or a burqa? And I think I'd rather see Vince Cable wear a burqa. But that doesn't mean that his characterization of the minimum capital requirements is correct by referring to these people as capital jihadis.
Yeah.
Okay, Vince Cable as a pasty-wearing capitalist terrorist slash financial enabler of the City of London to rehypothecate what non-assets they have to even greater levels of Ponzi nirvana is now on the table. In other words, he's revealed himself. He has shown his true colors, Vince Cable, as being this financial terrorist who promotes Ponzi schemes.
Let's roll back a little bit to say exactly what's happening here. So the Bank of England's Prudential Regulation Authority, the PRA, has ordered Britain's 5 biggest lenders to raise £13.4 billion to plug a £27.1 billion gap in their finances. So George Osborne is also agreeing with Vince Cable here. He refers to the jihadist tendency in Threadneedle Street. And this is despite this puny amount, $27.1 billion, that we've had the funding for lending scheme. All of that money did not go to small businesses. In fact, investment is down by 30%. they're only lending to these Ponzi schemes, to housing. Every single freaking penny you give these people, they just go into the speculative Ponzi scheme here. And in terms of this money, here's the £27.1 billion gap. You know, Apple has just reported almost $150 billion cash and bonds just sitting on their balance sheet. There's too much cash in the world. There's trillions sitting on these corporate balance sheets. Why are they not putting it to work if there's such a great economy out here?
Right. Well, to get into this specifics of what's going on here with this call that banks should be looser with their minimum capital reserves. You know, Osborne brought in this funding for lending, and then he brought in the Help to Buy scheme, which is to get people to speculate in the housing market again. And then Nationwide, one of the banks, they said that, well, we can't do both. We can't have the lending scheme that you're proposing and have minimal capital requirements because we're already breaching that 3% level. And so this is what triggered Cable and Osborne to go after the regulators and saying, and Mervyn King, the outgoing Bank of England head, saying, look, we have to allow these banks to reduce their minimum capital requirements, inviting another catastrophe as we saw in 2008. And who's going to be on their side but the new Bank of England head, Mark Carney, who is going to be, you know, pulled into this scheme. And what it means is print, print, print by the Bank of England. It's going to have more inflationary pressure right now. Inflation's on a tear in the UK. It's 3.1%, you know, that the government says, but it's actually 8%, 9% unofficially. So you're going to see that continue to race ahead. Living standards continue to collapse, and the housing market will reach the point of a bubble and then collapse.
Again, this is our form of jihad here. It's a war on disbelievers. So they're angry that we don't believe their lies, that they're telling us lies. We know the economy is crashing. We know wages are down. And so what's supporting these house prices rising? Where are the jobs? Where is the real income? Where is the real wealth creation?
You know what? Vince Cable is calling me an infidel because I don't believe in his Ponzi economics. I would return it and say, Vince Cable, you're apostate, which means that you've turned your back on free market capitalism. You're a frickin' welfare socialist bum queen who's out there sucking on the teeth of the state and the Bank of England with free money. That you're a bum. You're not even apostate. You're not even worthy of that phrase. You're just a bum in the street begging for money.
So, you know, and now we'll go on to the next story here about disbelievers, because a recent study has shown that our artificial intelligence, computer algorithms, have about the intelligence of a 4-year-old. And part of the reason why they're not smarter yet is that they don't have common sense. They can't tell basically a lie. They can only take the data and the facts, historical correlations, historical data, and determine where things are going to go. So in terms of this war on disbelievers that the central banks are engaged in, humans beating robots most since '08 as trends shift currencies. So this is in the Forex trading markets, and humans are proving more adept than computers in reacting to the Federal Reserve's mixed messages, i.e. lies, on when policymakers will reduce their unprecedented stimulus. So at the moment, most Forex trading is done via algorithms, but the few that are done by humans are actually outperforming the algorithmic trading on currencies because they're looking at historical data and trends and what should normally happen, and it's not happening.
I'll tell you what's going on here. The computers were generating returns that were consistent with market conditions and consistent with inflation trends and consistent with interest rate policies. And those returns were not sufficient enough to cover the extraordinary malfeasance that people like Vince Cable is encouraging. So what the humans have done is they are basically rigging markets to confuse the machines and saying we're outperforming the machines based on our own rigging and trading on inside information. And somehow this has turned into a story that humans are now beating the machines. No, humans are unplugging the machines because the machines were telegraphing the fact that the humans were rigging the markets. So now they're saying, well, let's unplug them because it's offering too much transparency on what Vince Cable wants us to do, which is to rig markets, manipulate markets, and to commit fraud.
Well, Richard Olson from Zurich is quoted in this, and he's the founder of Olson Limited, who has designed currency trading models since 1986. And he says about what's going on in the Forex markets at the moment, central banks have become the insider traders of the currency market, which is a paradigm shift that systematic traders cannot pick up as well as fundamental traders. Systematic traders are the algorithmic trading, the robots.
In other words, the NSA and all of the surveillance technology made it very difficult to beat the markets and generate any kind of alpha or in your portfolio, because all of the differentials between market pricing had been arbitraged away through these sophisticated computers. And so the returns from these algorithmic computing programs were not sufficient enough to pay the interest on the yacht that I just bought. If I just paid $200 million for a yacht, and I need to generate a certain amount of return manipulating markets, I can't have some computer that's going to efficiently arbitrage away all the fraud, get in the way of those yacht payments. So I'm going to blame the computer, unplug the computer, manipulate markets more, convince Vince Cable and Mark Carney and George Osborne to commit more fraud than they already are doing so that I don't miss my yacht payment.
Again, we go back to this fact that there's a breakdown of long-held correlations, i.e. the disbelieving. So, you know, you should be able to enter in the algorithmic trading, the data, the facts, what would normally happen in a supply and demand situation. But none of those work anymore, plus the central bankers are lying. So when Ben Bernanke said that he's going to taper, the computers lost because they didn't expect that. They weren't anticipating that based on the data of unemployment and inflation and other numbers. So they've lost in there. And that's the important thing to look at here of what happens with central bankers. So when Vince Cable is saying that this is a problem of the central bank not of demanding the banks commit more fraud, because that's what he's saying, because this is all they're engaged in at this moment, of lending fraudulently based on collateral that doesn't really exist. That the breakdown of this data has resulted in long-held asset correlations is proving problematic for many computer-based funds, i.e. the ones that can't detect the lies.
Well, let's talk about the Trades Union Congress, TUC, the unions. Okay, get the Trades Union Congress to hire computers to go after these guys in the City of London, right? So hire the computers to go toe-to-toe with Vince Cable and his coterie of crooks. See, and they'll make tons of money at the expense of the city. Don't let the city unplug the computers because they don't want TUC from benefiting from this advanced technology.
Well, Max, finally, you know, I want to just point out that this is a war on disbelievers. They're telling you lies and they're demanding you believe that, just like the Taliban in Afghanistan is saying that this is our interpretation of a book and you have to believe it, otherwise you're an unbeliever, even if the book doesn't actually say what we say we believe in. This is the same what's going on in economic, central bank policy, monetary policy, currency policy, financial policy, and economic policy around the world. They're telling us lies and telling us we're going to punish you with 0% rates, -0 rates. We're going to take your savings, we're going to confiscate your savings, we're going to bail in you if you continue to disbelieve our lies.
Scary. All right, Stacey Herbert, it's all clear. Thanks for